The silence after battle was always the worst. Captain Elias Cade crouched behind a collapsed section of the outpost's reinforced wall, his breath steady despite the pain in his ribs. The Dominion strike had been swift and brutal, decimating his squad before they had a chance to regroup. Now, he was alone, deep in enemy territory, with no way to call for backup. His rifle was, his knife slick with alien blood, and his comms were dead. Smoke curled into the alien sky from burning wreckage, the scent of scorched metal and flesh thick in the air. Somewhere in the ruins, Dominion patrols moved with cold efficiency, sweeping for survivors. Cade knew they wouldn't take prisoners. He exhaled slowly, pressing his back against the wall as he listened. Footsteps. 3, maybe 4 hostiles. They were moving in formation, scanning the area with their. His armor was insulated, but if they got too close, it wouldn't matter. He needed to move. Sliding into the shadows, Cade moved with practiced ease, keeping low as he navigated through the crumbling remains of what had once been a Terran forward outpost. His mind worked through his options. His last-known rendezvous point was over 15 clicks away, and there was no guarantee anyone had made it out alive. The Dominion had overrun them in minutes, slaughtering his squad with precision. He tightened his grip on his rifle. It hadn't been a battle, it had been an execution. He gritted his teeth, pushing the memories aside. Now wasn't the time. He needed to find a way out before they boxed him in. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a Dominion soldier, tall and armored in their sleek plating, scanning the area with an energy rifle raised. Cade flattened against the wreckage as the alien passed within meters of him. The Dominion were meticulous hunters. Their warriors didn't hesitate, didn't. He knew their tactics well. If he stayed here too long, they'd find him. His muscles called as he prepared to move, but then something strange caught his eye. Just beyond the patrol's path, a section of the outpost's floor had collapsed, revealing an underground passage, hidden beneath the ruins. That hadn't been in the mission brief. Whatever was down there, the Dominion didn't seem to have noticed it yet. Cade waited for the patrol to pass before slipping toward the opening. The drop was about 10 feet, the ground below anyone with debris, but it was better than getting caught on the surface. He took a breath, then slid down, landing with a soft grunt. The air here was cooler, untouched by the fires above. He flicked on his rifle's flashlight, sweeping the beam across the subterranean space. The architecture was different from the outpost above. Olden, the walls lined with strange inscriptions that glowed faintly in response to his light. The Dominion hadn't built this. This was something else. Something ancient. Cautiously, he moved forward, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. The passage sloped downward, leading to a vast chamber illuminated by a faint, pulsating energy at its center. A console, covered in alien glyphs, sat before what looked like a containment field. Cade approached slowly, his instincts on edge. The Dominion had sent an entire force to wipe out his squad, but they hadn't touched this place. Why? He reached out, brushing his fingers across the console, and the moment he did, the entire room came to life. The glyphs ignited, flowing with energy, and the containment field flickered, revealing something massive within. A machine, or perhaps a weapon, built from a technology he had never seen before. It thrummed with power, responding to his presence as if recognizing him. A low vibration filled the chamber, and Cade span, raising his rifle. The Dominion had heard it. Distant shouts echoed down the corridor, guttural, commanding. They were coming. He looked back at the console. He had no idea what this place was or what the machine did, but he knew one thing for certain. If the Dominion wanted it, they couldn't have it. He turned back to the console and did what any good soldier would do in a situation like this. He pressed the biggest button he could find. The chamber trembled as the console's glyphs pulsed brighter, casting strange shadows across the ancient walls. Captain Elias Cade took a step back, rifle raised, watching as the containment field crackled and flickered. The Dominion warriors were closing in, their guttural shouts echoing down the passage. He had mere seconds before they were on him. His instincts screamed at him to move, but his eyes were locked on the machine before him. An immense construct, unlike anything he had ever seen. As the energy field collapsed, the air itself seemed to shudder, as if something impossibly vast had just stirred awake. A deafening pulse shot through the chamber, and suddenly, time seemed to slow. Cade barely had time to register the Dominion soldiers busting through the entrance before the machine roared to life. A surge of energy exploded outward, sending shockwaves through the underground complex. The first Dominion warrior through the doorway barely had time to react before he was hit by an invisible force, his armor crumpling like paper as he was thrown back into his comrades. The rest staggered, clutching their heads as if something was tearing into their minds. Cade felt it too, a deep, resonating hum in his skull, like a voice speaking without words, filling his thoughts with raw, unfiltered power. He gritted his teeth, trying to push past the sensation as the Dominion soldiers recovered. One of them, a hulking brute in command insignia, raised his rifle and barked an order. The others responded instantly, their weapons trained on Cade. He dived behind the console as plasma fire tore through the space he had just occupied. The air burned hot around him, energy bolts slamming into the ancient walls, sending shards of stone and debris cascading around him. Cade popped up, returning fire in quick, precise bursts, taking one warrior in the throat before ducking down again. But he was outnumbered. He wouldn't last long. The machine, however, had other plans. The moment Cade pressed himself against the console, something shifted. A surge of data, too vast and complex for him to understand, flooded through the system. The machine wasn't just activating, it was recognizing him. Another pulse of energy erupted from its core, and this time, Cade felt it wrap around him like an unseen force. His vision sharpened, his reflexes heightened, as if something deep inside him had just been unlocked. A Dominion warrior rushed him, energy blade igniting, but Cade saw the move before it even happened. His body reacted before his mind could process it. He sidestepped, twisting away from the strike with inhuman speed, then drove his combat knife into the alien's exposed joint before spinning and unloading a shot into another's faceplate. The Dominion had expected a cornered, desperate human. Instead, they had just unleashed something else entirely. The remaining soldiers hesitated, uncertainty flickering across their reptilian features. They had fought humans before, had slaughtered them in countless skirmishes. But this was different. Cade wasn't just reacting, he was predicting. He moved faster than they could track, dodging plasma fire by mere inches, taking them apart with ruthless efficiency. It wasn't just skill. It was something more. The machine had changed him. A sudden, sharp chime filled the chamber, and Cade turned just in time to see the construct fully awaken. Massive, interlocking plates shifted, revealing a core of brilliant, pulsating energy. The Dominion commandant saw it too, his golden eyes widening in recognition and fear. He shouted something in his native tongue, a desperate order, before reaching for a device at his belt. Cade didn't need to understand the language to know what was happening. The Dominion wasn't here to claim this machine. They were here to destroy it. The commandant's fingers grazed the detonator. But Cade was already moving. He lunged forward, grabbing the alien's wrist and twisting it violently. Bones snapped, and the device clattered to the floor. The commandant roared in pain, but Cade didn't give him time to recover. He drove his rifle stock into the alien's throat, sending him sprawling backward. The other Dominion warriors hesitated, momentarily stunned by the sheer speed of the assault. That hesitation cost them. The machine released a final, resonating pulse, and suddenly, everything changed. The remaining Dominion soldiers froze, their bodies rigid, their weapons slipping from their grasp. Their expressions contorted into something between shock and agony, as if something deep inside them was being rewritten. Cade took a cautious step back, watching as they collapsed one by one, their bodies lifeless before they even hit the ground. The chamber fell into eerie silence. Cade's breath came heavy as he turned toward the machine. The pulsating energy dimmed slightly, as if acknowledging what had just occurred. Whatever this thing was, it had just wiped out an entire squad of Dominion elites without firing a single shot. And more than that, it had changed him. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. He felt stronger, faster, more aware. The machine had done something to him, something permanent. A distant rumble echoed through the underground complex. Reinforcements. The Dominion would be back, and they wouldn't come unprepared. Cade didn't know what the machine was or why it had chosen him, but he knew one thing for certain. If the Dominion wanted it gone, that meant it was worth protecting. He grabbed his rifle, squared his shoulders, and turned toward the exit. It was time to see just how much the odds had shifted. The sky above burned red with fire and smoke, the remains of shattered warships falling like dying embers onto the ruined city below. The streets, once a proud testament to Dominion's strength, were now a graveyard of crumbling towers and scorched matter. Captain Elias Cade moved like a ghost through the destruction, his footsteps silent, his pulse steady. He was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by a crumbling empire that had once believed itself untouchable. The machine's power still hummed beneath his skin, sharpening his senses, guiding his every movement like an unseen force whispering in his mind. He had become something else, something more, and the Dominion knew it. That was why they hunted him. The air was thick with tension as he slipped into the ruins of what had once been a command center. Dominion banners still hung from the broken walls, torn and frayed, their insignia now symbols of defeat. He moved cautiously, his rifle raised, scanning for movement. A single wrong step could mean death. The Dominion was desperate, and desperation made them dangerous. A low growl echoed through the chamber. Cade froze. He knew that sound. A Dominion hunter, one of their elite killers, bred and trained for a single purpose: to eliminate threats like him. He shifted his grip on his weapon, scanning the shadows. The air was heavy, charged with anticipation. He wasn't alone. The attack came in a blur of motion. A massive, reptilian warrior burst from the darkness, claws flashing in the dim light. Cade moved before he could think, ducking under the first strike, feeling the wind of it pass inches from his face. He twisted, bringing his rifle up, but the hunter was already on him. A massive fist caught him in the chest, sending him skidding across the floor. Pain flared through his ribs, but he forced himself up, rolling to the side just as the hunter's blade slammed into the ground where he had been. Cade exhaled sharply, centering himself. The machine's power surged within him, and suddenly, the hunter's movements weren't just fast, they were predictable. Cade saw the next attack before it came, sidestepping at the last second, then driving his boot into the hunter's knee. The alien roared in pain, staggering, and Cade took his chance. He span, bringing the butt of his rifle up in a brutal arc, smashing it into the side of the hunter's skull. The warrior collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. Cade didn't hesitate. He grabbed the Dominion soldier's communicator and keyed into the encrypted frequency. The voices on the other end were frantic, desperate. The Dominion forces were falling apart, their ranks crumbling under the weight of a war they had started but could no longer control. And yet, they still refused to surrender. A new voice came through the channel, cold and commanding. "High Warlord." The Dominion leader who had orchestrated this war, who had led his people to the brink of annihilation. Cade listened, his grip tightening on the device. Was ordering his forces to regroup, to make a final stand against the humans. They still believed they could win. Cade shook his head. The arrogance, the sheer refusal to accept reality, was staggering. He couldn't let it continue. Slipping back into the shadows, Cade made his way through the ruined city, following the transmission back to its source. A towering citadel stood at the heart of the devastation, its spires now blackened and broken. That was where was making his last stand. Cade moved quickly, dispatching stray patrols with ruthless efficiency, his every move guided by the power within him. By the time he reached the citadel's command chamber, the warlord was waiting. Stood tall, his golden eyes burning with hatred and defiance. His armor was battered, his body marked with wounds, but he still held himself like a king. Around him, his last remaining warriors stood ready, weapons drawn, prepared to fight to the death. Cade stepped forward, rifle lowered. He met gaze and spoke, his voice calm but firm. "It's over." Let out a low, rambling growl. "You think you have won." Cade gestured to the ruined city around them, to the burning skies, to the silence where once there had been an empire. "Look around you. There's nothing left." Fists clenched, his claws digging into his palms. "The Dominion does not surrender." Cade exhaled, shaking his head. "Then you'll die for nothing." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, raised his weapon. His soldiers did the same. Cade tensed, preparing for the inevitable fight. But then, something changed. The machine's power pulsed within him, and he saw it: hesitation, doubt, fear. The Dominion warriors weren't as certain as their leader. They had seen what Cade had done. They had seen what the humans were capable of. One by one, they began to lower their weapons. Eyes widened in disbelief as his soldiers stepped back, their resolve crumbling. He turned to them, furious, but they would not meet his gaze. They knew the truth. The war was lost. Cade watched as the high warlord's shoulders sagged, the weight of reality finally settling upon him. Let out a slow, shuddering breath, then dropped his weapon. The sound of it hitting the ground echoed through the chamber. The war was over. Cade stepped forward, standing over the fallen warlord. He didn't feel triumph, only exhaustion. This war should never have happened. But now, at last, it was done. The fires of war had begun to die, but the scars would remain forever. The Dominion's empire lay in ruins, its strongholds reduced to rubble, its warships either destroyed or in full retreat. Across the smoldering battlefield, human forces moved with grim efficiency, securing the remnants of their victory. Captain Elias Cade stood at the center of it all, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the last Dominion ships fled into the void. The war was over, but the end felt hollow. Victory had come at a cost too great to measure. The wind howled through the ruined city, carrying the acrid scent of burnt matter and blood. Here, in the heart of what had been the Dominion's greatest capital, silence had taken hold. No more battle cries, no more desperate roars of defiance. The reptilian warriors who had once fought with unshakable pride were now scattered, either captured, dead, or clinging to the remnants of their broken civilization. The mighty had fallen, and Cade had been there to witness it. He moved through the ruins, past wrecked war machines and shattered statues of Dominion rulers. His weapon was slung over his back now. There was no need for it anymore. The enemy had surrendered. Those who hadn't were gone, fleeing to whatever corners of the galaxy would still have them. But he knew the truth. There would be no sanctuary for them. The Dominion had made too many enemies, and with their power broken, their former vassals and rivals would descend like vultures. Their fate was sealed. A flickering buzzed to life amidst the wreckage, its message repeating on a loop. A final transmission from High Warlord, recorded before his surrender. His voice, once filled with defiance, was now hollow. "The Dominion has fallen," he had said. "We believed ourselves eternal. We believed ourselves strong. We were wrong. We were blind to the truth. And now we are nothing." Cade watched the message play out, his expression unreadable. Had been a monster, but he had also been a leader who truly believed in his cause. In the end, that belief had cost him everything. A movement in the rubble caught Cade's attention. He turned, hand hovering over his sidearm, but then he saw them, a group of Dominion civilians, huddled in the remains of a collapsed structure. Their eyes, wide and fearful, locked onto him. A mother clutched her child tightly, her scales covered in dust and ash. They did not speak, did not beg, did not move. They were waiting to see what would happen next. Cade exhaled and took a step back, lowering his hand. "You're safe," he said quietly. "This war is over." The words hung in the air, foreign to them. Did they believe him? Could they? For so long, humans had been their enemies, the nightmares whispered about in the darkness. And yet, here he stood, offering them a fate other than death. Slowly, cautiously, the mother nodded. Cade turned away, continuing his path through the ruins. There was no need for more words. As he walked, a voice crackled in his earpiece. General Harper. Cade repeated. He tapped his calm. The city is secure. The Minyan forces have withdrawn. No further resistance. A pause. Then, Endon stood. Good work, Captain. We'll begin evacuation procedures for civilians shortly. Stand by for further orders. Cade sighed, running a hand through his hair. There would be no celebration. No cheers of triumph. Just the quiet duty of cleaning up what remained. This was what victory looked like: ash, dust, and a future that had yet to be written. A few hours later, he stood at the edge of a ruined overlook, gazing down at what remained of the Dominion capital. Human forces moved with precision, setting up relief stations for surviving civilians, marking locations for reconstruction. The Dominion was no more, but something new would rise in its place. What that would be, no one knew yet. But for the first time in generations, the galaxy's future was unwritten. A shutter descended from the sky, its engines kicking up dust as it landed behind him. Cade turned as General Harper stepped out, her sharp gaze surveying the battlefield before settling on him. You did well, she said. This wouldn't have been possible without you. Cade shrugged. It would have happened eventually. We just made sure it ended sooner. Harper studied him for a moment. And now? He looked back at the ruins. Now we see what comes next. She nodded, stepping beside him. The galaxy will remember this day. The fall of the Dominion. The rise of something new. Cade exhaled, watching the last Dominion warship disappear into the void. Yeah, he murmured. They'll remember.